If anybody saw it on Tuesday, we do throwback videos on Tuesday called Turn Back Tuesday now. And so for this week, of course, with Mark passing us last weekend, we were one of the things that I'll always hold in my highest regard was that I got to do 3 different seminars with Mark Pack by my side, just like Mike is tonight. And I put all those together, and there's an hour and a half of Mark Pack sitting here just like we are in this same spot talking fishing, and it's posted on our YouTube channel. We posted it up Tuesday, so I'd encourage you to go watch that. But as I was putting that video together, I got to hear an hour and a half of Mark Pack talking fishing. And there was so many things, and the deal that I came away with at the end of that thing, watching him talk 3 different times a year. One was in this time of year, one was in May, and one was in September. And what I came away with was he was so detailed. One of the quotes in one of those seminars was, a lot of times, it's not that the bait you're fishing is wrong. It's the way you're fishing it. He was so creative and so detail-oriented about how he fished different baits. And really, Mark Pack's repertoire of baits was pretty simple. It was a Carolina rig. It was a jig. It was a square bill. It was a drop shot. And it really wasn't, I mean, there was other things he did, but not a lot else.
Well, and not to knock him down, because he was a champion. He won 2 major tournaments, so he could do anything. But as a guide.
But with those baits, he did unlimited amounts of presentations to the fish with those baits. And one thing is, we're sitting here talking about throwing that on the Carolina rig. One thing that I know Pack was kind of notorious for was we all take the Carolina, we can drag it over stuff, or we fish, it's like slow to slower. That's how you pretty much fish the Carolina. Pac-Man would take the Carolina rig and just snap it. Wow.
I was just going to say that. That's my next thing.
Snap, snap, snap.
And jerk bait.
And one thing that he preached too was no matter how shallow you are, 1 ounce weight. 1 ounce weight's the only weight for a Carolina rig.
That's exactly where I was going next.
Go ahead.
So I was saying the number 1 way that he fished this, amongst everything, was to snap it.
Yeah.
Think jerk bait. Okay, so now, I have 2 rigs. I have a full-blown rig, which is a 4 or 5 foot leader, a 1 ounce weight, and the large baits. I have what I call a finesse rig, which is a 1/2 ounce weight, 3 feet, 2 feet of line, and the small impact shafts. When I have impact shafts behind my bait, or behind that Carolina rig, I never drag it. I never pull it. I have 3 stages. One is the cast and pause, let it sink. Second phase, check it, which means lifting just enough to feel, is the fish there? Is he swimming away with it? Is there pressure? You won't feel the thump thump. Very rare do you feel the thump thump because you're connected to the weight, the bait is free. So you're lifting, checking. Third is the snap snap to make it be a jerk bait. Okay? Then redundant. Check, snap snap, pause. Just like a jerk bait. Okay? Exactly like a jerk bait. Don't think Carolina rig, think jerk bait. Now, I don't want to confuse you. If you go to a brush hog real quick, and he loves throwing out stuff like that every now and then, he'd throw a creature bait on it, you drag it. Yeah. It's got appendages and things, swimmers, so if he'd go to a Carolina rig brush hog...
It's not that there's not a place to drag the Carolina rig.
You'd see him pull it more. Right, a brush hog, if he put a brush hog on that same, he decided they ain't eating this today, we'll go to try a brush hog, he'd pull it more to make those tails and things swim. I want this to dart and glide down. Dart and glide down. That's
the thing about that always having a 1 ounce weight deal is, and he talked about this on a few different baits. He talked about, I should have said swim bait. He threw a swim bait a bunch.
Yes, he did.
And he would throw them out deep, and he would throw them on 2 ounce jig heads. Only person I've ever heard of having 2 ounce jig heads in a bass fishing repertoire. But Pac-Man would throw an offshore swim bait on a 2 ounce jig head. Same thing with the Carolina rig, though. 1 ounce weight even if you're in a foot of water. The deal is, that bait falls fast and he hits the bottom and boom, kicks up silt. Kicks up whatever it hits. And it causes a disturbance, which is, these shell beds are great for feeding fish, but especially on this lake, even feeding fish aren't always easy to catch. Sure. And a lot of times you got to make them react. And that snapping of that Carolina rig, always throwing a 1 ounce weight, always kicking up silt and dust, creating disturbance, creating a cloud. Throwing the swim bait on a 2 ounce deal, fishing a 1 ounce jig instead of a 1/2 ounce in an 8 foot creek channel. All these things that Pac did, a lot of it, if you look at it, it's designed to make a bait cause sudden, erratic, sharp actions and cause disturbances down on the bottom.
Get attention.
That are going to make a fish react. You're not just feeding them, you're making them react. And so he was taking the combination of being in areas where they're feeding, and then fishing the bait in different ways to force the fish to react, even if they didn't want to. And that's what made him so stinking deadly.
And I'd like to this is coming to my brain that I can add to this. That I mean, not learning myself, but I'm what am I saying? How do I say? In 2000s, I was married happily on the West Coast, and my wife every now and then let me take her to the lake and beach the boat. And some of those lakes aren't like here; they're crystal clear water. You could see 100 feet. And one afternoon, we had beached the boat, and we were walking knee deep in the water. And I could feel the slithering through my legs from time to time. Each time if I stopped moving, I wouldn't feel anything. But if all of a sudden I'd move and what the heck is that?
Oh, yeah, bait fish. Yeah.
And I finally realized that every time I would step, there'd be a poof, which would stir the bottom, stir the plankton. The shad would come up and eat. Okay? It just clicked at that. I just remembered that. That's what Mark is doing too in the shell beds. So what's that 1 ounce weight doing? Stirring the dirt. The shad are in the shell bed. What are they doing? Eat. So
I've got to tell you a funny story.
Great. Yeah.
I've got to tell you a funny story because you talking about the bait fish in the dirt cloud. I'm not from the West Coast. We don't have pretty water down here.
I like the water here better. It's easy.
We got that old stuff. You step in the water, you ain't sure what you get in it with.
I'd really rather it
now. My dad
Clear
used to have
fish.
some property, and he built a lake behind his house, and it was 8 acres or so at lake. But he stocked it with hybrid bluegill.
Oh gosh!
Which, if you don't know,
they'll eat you up.
A hybrid bluegill is a piranha without teeth.
Yep.
That sucker is mean. He's just mean. He's madder than a jab. He's just all the time. And if you have freckles,
yes,
or moles, and you're swimming out there, they literally come up and hit you. But when you were sitting off the side of the dock, when you ease off in the water, when you step down there, it's real, soft East Texas water. And you kick up that dirt, that would the same thing. It would draw the bait fish in, except it would draw them hybrid bluegills in, and then your legs, literally, you'd be bleeding. They would fish with no teeth would be biting your leg so hard you'd have little blood spots on them.
Yeah, those things can peck hard.
They are mean, son.
Yep.
So we used to try to make sure that we jumped out where we wouldn't kick up any dirt. We'd take a running start off the dock and jump out where you didn't kick up any dirt, so the bluegills didn't tear you up. But you start talking about, I was cracking up on the inside. Yeah.
One other thing, and we talked about bedrooms, and since I kind of titled this again, in the footsteps of the pioneer. This part I'm going to share with, I'm not very good at. I don't think any of us ever figured this out. But this would be my highest tribute to the man, because it was something that none of us could ever do. 99% of what Mark Peck taught me, I was able to get my hands around. I'm the kind of guy, and I mean this most humbly, that a fisherman anyways, if you give me an inch, I'm going to turn it into a mile. And Mark gave me many inches. So I really was able to turn it into many miles. And I owe that man the gratefulness why I'm here. It also changed me as a Christian. But this little bite that I'm going to teach you about is a bedroom bite, and it happens later on in the year. And I just don't think anybody ever has figured out how to do it.
I've tried. It ain't easy.
And it's fishing these same baits. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but basically weightless. Now, not quite weightless, but he would put a 7-odd hook in them. He'd add a little bit of extra weights in them. And he'd go out there and find them trees in 50, 60 feet of water. And there'd be an entire oak tree. And the tops of that oak tree would be 20, 22, 25. And he'd throw this doggone weightless thing out there without the ball and chain, because you couldn't throw the ball and chain in that stuff. It wouldn't work. And he'd count that thing down to that 22 foot. It takes about a half a second, a foot, he'd say, sometimes a little more. And he would patiently twitch, the tiniest little twitch, and count to 5 again. It would take over 5 minutes to bring that bait back per cast, which means you're only getting about 12 casts an hour. How many of you can fish 12 casts an hour?
No, yeah, he was.
I've never been able to.
We talked about this on the podcast when we were talking about him, and he actually talks about this in one of the seminars that he did with us. But it was the fact that he could do it, and he had it so dialed in. He knew exactly. It's one thing to understand the bait well enough to understand with wind variances, because if the wind starts blowing a little bit, it's going to change how fast that bait falls. And he understood that part of it. And maybe the part that was the most astonishing to me was not only did he understand that, but he understood when he twitched it, how long it took to fall back to the right zone.
That's the hardest part.
Because when the line's 20 foot down and you twitch it, it's coming up some. So twitch, it comes up 2, 3, 4 feet, whatever. He knew exactly how far it was coming up, and he knew exactly how long it took to get right back in their face and then twitch it again. The timing and the detail on that pattern is what makes it to where nobody else really does it effectively.
Yes. He used to say 2 things to me. One, he'd say, number one, is if when you bringing that bait up, when you finally get to see that bait, if it ain't coming from underneath the boat, you were fishing too fast.
Yeah, it's a really hard deal for me. I'm not cut out to fish.
The other thing he would tell me is the time. When do you do this, Mark? He said when they're not visiting the shell beds.
Yeah.
And they're in the trees. And you've camped enough. You've taken your lickings. You're saying, look, boys, they ain't biting on these shell beds today. We're going to go to the bedroom. The heck with them. They ain't visiting the shell beds. Deer hunting, you can't do that. You can't go out there and rust the deer up and bust them out and throw them in their bed. While they're bedded down, you just won't find them. In the bass fishing world with the sonars, you can find them. And you can fish them in the bedrooms. And this is how you fish them bedrooms usually. I didn't know about the 2 ounce on the swim bait. I knew it was a big swim bait, and I knew it was clunking bottom. He didn't want that swim bait like everybody else. He wanted contacting that shell.
When it hit bottom, he wanted it to hit.
And I'm going to tell you now, as I talk more of these things, as I grow as a fisherman, because we always grow and we always learn. If you've ever been out there and you've had one of these shells close down on your baits, it's pretty unique every now and then, a wheel to close down on your line. Where you get it stuck in a hook and bring one back. Over the past 6 or 7 years, as I get more and more better with this, fish it more often, specifically the last couple, I've brought in a lot of shell that, unlike this one, it has a perfect little hole in it about the size of a 1 ounce jig.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's probably that 1 ounce Carolina rig smacking them, or that jig or that big swim bait hitting them. And it's really made sense to me. They're very fragile.
As you guys go out and y'all try to figure this deal out for yourself, I want you to remember this shell. I want you to think about this shell right here, this one shell. Because when you get on the spot, in all these spots, you're going to make varied casts around and all that, especially like with a Carolina rig or a big jig. You're going to really feel the bottom as you drag it. And even though the snapping, it's great to get bites, I would highly encourage you to drag it thoroughly with a 1 ounce Carolina rig. Maybe even try a tungsten. I know it's expensive to lose one, but just to get a good feel for what you're fishing. Because there will be, within each one of these, a small area, usually no bigger than this little section of this room right here, that's going to be where you're going to get most of your bites from. And some of these shell beds are really big, and there'll be one spot. And think of this shell right here, because when you're dragging that Carolina rig, you'll feel it go clunk, 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 and it'll feel bigger. The clunks will be bigger, and it'll be you going over these guys right here.
You can tell for sure.
And when you feel that, it's just like a bass. A bigger bass has to eat more than a 2-pounder, right? A bigger shell has to eat more plankton than a small shell. So wherever that plankton gets the most concentrated, that's where these suckers are going to be. And wherever the plankton gets the most concentrated, that's where the bigger shad are going to go when they show up.
Yes.
You know, the one thing that's a little bit something that I had to figure out for myself on the shell bed deal is just because you find the greatest shell bed in the world, and Mike's been talking about it all night, just because you find the greatest shell bed in the world doesn't mean there's fish on it every day. The plankton can't, the shells can't get up and chase the plankton around the lake, but the shad can. So it has to be when the plankton's present, that's when the shad are present, that's when the bass are going to really show up and feed in numbers. But the sweet spot on all these spots, you're going to have stuff like this on it, and when you drag it and you feel those bigger clunks, think of that shell right there, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a very distinct feeling when you find it.
If I may invite them, I have a lesson on my YouTube channel about how to find it.
Yes, of course.
So if you'll go to the Lake Fork Guide YouTube site, you can watch that, how to find, mark, and understand shell beds. You always want to test it. The double echo on the sonar is suggestively a hard bottom and potentially a shell bed. Once you throw that bait through, like he just said, it's perfect. A few times you'll know real fast if it's a shell bed. And you hit one last thing I want to talk about. This is a young one. These get huge.
Yeah.
And so sometimes shell beds can come and go, depending on currents and things like that. And when there's hundreds and hundreds of shell beds out there, how do you know which ones the big fish use? And remember this, and I'll leave you on this. Mark Pack would always say, a really, really big fish has to have deep water nearby. Okay? Meaning close within a certain range, 50 yards or less usually, rule of thumb, there'll be something deep water, a break, a channel, a creek, an escape, if you will. They'll never, hardly ever, except during the spawn, pin themselves up somewhere. Not the giant fish. They're a tiger. It's a mountain lion. It's a predator, an ultimate predator that is programmed to kill.
What do you call them deep? What do you reference deep?
Okay, so great question. I'm glad you brought that up. Back home, I would say 30 plus. Here in Texas, you just need 10 feet nearby. So if I got a shallow shell bed and it's got a nice break, quick break nearby, then the odds are that those fish even may stage on that quick break, and it's quick. Everything's fast. So 10, 12 feet can be all you need. In fork, it can be even a little bit less. Think escape. So sometimes some of my best shell beds aren't necessarily that deep water nearby, but there's a channel right next to it. They're in the channel and gone, just like that.
Or a drain.
Or a drain.
It doesn't necessarily have to be like Mike said, it doesn't have to be like some big, huge, obvious drop off or a big creek channel drop. It could be just a 12-foot drain that runs up and all of a sudden jumps up on a 3-foot shell bed.
And just like he was saying, he led me this here. I can go find you a shell bed out there that's the size of a tennis court. And it gets visited every day by stuff. You can catch white bass on it. You can catch yellow bass on it. You can catch numbers and more fish. You're not necessarily going to hook into a teenager on that one. It's more visited. It's more active shell bed. There's finding some of those that are in those key areas and those juice spots. Again, why we talked about the loon.
Yeah, spot within the spot type deal, right?
The loon shows me the spot within the spot, and the loon guarantees me that it's on the big bait, so I can make my decision real quick.
What's up, Roy?
If you don't use a tungsten weight, you ain't gonna feel those shell beds as good with you.
Yeah, if you're using
Not
lead,
really.
you won't have. That's why I say, and listen, I wouldn't ever tell anybody to go out there and use tungsten weights on your Carolina rig all the time. That can get expensive, right? Because you will hang up and break off Carolina rigs at times. But if you use lead, you're not going to be able to feel the distinct size difference and all that. Yeah.
Tungsten.
Good question. Good statement. What you may do is just have tungsten for a tester.
Right.
All by itself, even. Just get a
That's what I was
tungsten weight.
meaning. The first time when you're just first fishing them, okay,
You're wanting to know
I'm
for
going to
sure.
feel everything. I'm going to go ahead and sacrifice this tungsten if I have to. Hopefully I get it back. And then when you're fishing it the next week or the next day, then you go ahead and use lead.
Well, I'm gonna tell you,
'Cause now you know where the
fish
juice
with
is.
Tungsten weight, you won't go back to lead.
Yeah. I explained that pretty
I
well.
fish my Carolina rigs with all tungsten, but I'm spoiled.
I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a fishing guide, no offense to anybody, but I can't afford to have guys lose. At 1 ounce tungsten weight is about $5, and the way we lose stuff,
Yeah.
I tell you, in May last year, I lost 100 jigs.
How many jigs we lose yesterday?
So someone would go, wait a minute, oh, that's crazy, come on. They say, come on, how do you lose 100 jigs in May? Well, first of all, I'm fishing 6 days a week. I put 2 guys in my boat. If the guy in the back loses 2 and the guy in the front loses 2, just 2 each, times 6, that's 24 a week, times 4 weeks, that's 100. So all you got to do is lose 2 in the front, 2 in the back, 6 days. And I got 100 jigs down there. So I would love to use tungsten. It's a little bit out of
Aaron,
my
you had a
range.
question?
Yeah, I have a
But
question.
you do use that.
I have a question about
Yes,
the
sir.
shell bed. When I'm fishing it, and I don't know if it's just the way I do it, but when I find shell bed, there's a certain area of the shell bed that I fish.
Yeah.
Always.
And when I'm bumping it on the bottom, if it's a bump, I know it's real.
That's the center.
Yeah, that's the center, and that's where I want to.
Correct. That's it.
That's what
When
you
you're-
want to do. When you're new to it, you want to fish.
Thank you.
When you're new to it, you want to fish around and then find like the most concentrated.
concentrated.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you'll learn them once you get more and more familiar with them. You'll recognize that,
You need to really-
and that's showing some good seasoning now on your part. That you're really beginning to put that together, and you'll identify that juice spot, and that's really important.
Well, and I got that from deep sea fishing all
Yep.
the time with my family.
Excellent, and that's a great statement, and
And
it's
the other thing, one other question I had, because I'm from the West, where we can't have these feeders
right,
when we're hunting.
right.
Right.
I know where they eat and where they sleep. So sometimes them bass are like the loons and they're checking the grocery store out. So I'll position myself in a path that I can see that is the path they're going from the bedroom to the
Correct.
grocery store.
100%.
to catch them.
Did I convey that at all in some of this? Did you kind of gather that? Some of you were hoping would bite that and realize. I said it. Talked about the deer and the feeder. What's the avenue?
The trail.
Nobody was better than knowing the trail than Pack.
It's funny you say that because I actually have a really good friend. We have a mutual friend that's out here named Steve Wells, and he actually does do some guiding too. Steve
Yes.
Wells is a great guy.
Great friends with Mark Pack.
And he was a Pack protege, Pack trained kind of guy, and he'd tell you that Pack taught him most of what he knows about Lake Fork probably. But an area that he fishes with a mutual friend of ours, and that Pack fished a bunch, it's funny because it's not just a real obvious thing. It's next to a real obvious thing. We talked about this area just yesterday. There's a pond dam, and in the corners of this pond dam, there's points. And there's shell beds on the pond dam itself and on these points. And then down from that, there's a little gap. It goes from the main lake into this old pond. And all that is where those fish that are on that main lake side, when they come into that pond, a lot of times they use that little trough, that little gap. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen Pac-Man's boat power pulled down in that gap, customers on the back deck of the boat throwing down that little trough, because that is the intersection from the main lake, the bedroom, to that pond dam with those points and those shell beds. That's the pathway. That's the trail. And then when they're moving from main lake to those shell beds, and then maybe even to spawn in the back of that pond, that's where they're going to gather as they come in and out of there. It's the fun. And we talk about this a lot on our channel: funnel points, pinch points.
And that's
what that is.
That's the summary, right there, of what he was so good at. And I'm tearing up right now because that just made me see what I'm going to miss the entire month of February.
Him sitting there while you sitting over there.
So there's three of us that really work in the area. It's really unique each year. Brian Duchesne, myself, and Mark, and those hot spots, and you don't know where they're coming from for sure. You know they're going to come in there, and so it would be really funny. On Monday, we'd be all set up, and it didn't really matter who got there first. And Mark's spot would go off. So Tuesday, Brian would leave early. He'd get to the spot. He'd take Mark's where Mark was on Monday. I'd take where Brian was on Tuesday, and Mark take where I was on you get it. We're playing musical chairs, and that day. My spot would go off. You just didn't know which one of those would go off, and never all three spots. But every day, one of those three boats was going to catch a big, and one of those three boats was really going to be on the right spot for the day. And sometimes we all caught him, but it was just I'm going to miss that, and that's just what that was. Mm-hmm. Was the most highest percentage spot that I could tell my clients, look, you came here for a big one. I can't guarantee that. But what I can guarantee you is that your bait will be where they are, and they'll come by you. There'll be your opportunities. The fish will see your bait, and it was just really unique how that would go down. And it's going to go down this year. We're just going to have a missing man, the man that pioneered it. And Brian Duchesne's no slouch. I'm going to enjoy it, but I'm going to miss my friend. So, thank you, man. Dude, this worked out way better than I expected. Yeah. This man's got some neat stuff to show you.
So I just had an order that I put in with 6 cents, and so I wanted to kind of do a little bit of an unboxing and talk about some baits, because a lot of these baits in here are going to be baits that I'm going to use to try and capitalize on everything we talked about tonight.
Hey, now.
This first one is just a jig. That's for Creek Channel beds. That's, There's hundreds of them, remember? Anyways,
I'm sorry.
I get it. This first one's just a jig, and I'm gonna pass these around. I hope they don't disappear. They probably will in this group, I know. Sorry, they do, I guess.
Don't leave them with this one.
Yeah, pass them, but skip the couch. Skip the couch. I know you got hoodie pockets. I know. So this is just a jig. It's a jig I really like. It's I like black and blue, and I like greens, and this kind of combines both of it. But I'm just gonna show you guys some baits that I'm gonna be using from now until we get to spawn time, and then. When they start climbing on beds, y'all probably know what I'm going to be doing.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
I don't know if there's anybody better at it.
Half-ounce jig. It's called Dark Water Crawl. It's really cool. It's got black and green and all kinds of colors. Check that out, Mike.
Is it a swim jig or just a jig?
It's a flipping jig.
Okay.
You want the rest of the box? It's so greedy.
I don't want it.
Trust me, he needs them.
So good. Yeah, all the ones I broke off yesterday.
He's not real patient, I'll tell you that. He'll whack it a few times,
but sometimes you can't go. You can't. If you know they're in there, you can't afford to go there and mess it up.
Right?
Me and patient don't go together.
No. I got a swim bait jig head and I got a swim bait. So one thing we didn't talk about a whole lot tonight is that the swim bait bite on this deal is a very real thing, and even this time of year, And I've got these white swim baits, which are great this time of year when the water's still a little bit dirty. This is a new one from 6 Cents called the Whale. It just came out here in the last month or two, and I've been thoroughly, majorly impressed with that swim bait and how it operates. I mean, it catches them. I've been catching them on power plant lakes on them. I've caught them on cold water lakes. It just catches them. And then, of course, they've got these great jig heads with these screw locks on here that we're going to use to rig them up when we're fishing those shell beds. Because most of these shell beds don't really have The shallow ones don't have a whole lot of timber on them. A lot of the ones I like at least don't. And so you can get away with fishing an open top hook, and your hookup ratio is going to be better on those anyway.
I really do like the screw lock. It's a little bit
It's a
hard to
big
get
deal.
used to at first, but it really makes
It's a big deal to have
It
that, in
makes a
my
big
opinion.
deal.
Yeah, it is for sure. All right, we got any crankers in the house tonight? Anybody like the old crankbait?
Yeah.
Got a few guys like the old crankbait. So we're going to talk about the most underrated crankbait. This bait right here is the most underrated crankbait, in my opinion, on the market. And if you watch, especially if you watch some of those fall Bassmaster tournaments, and you watch colder time of the year, pro level events, you'll hear the term flat-sided crankbait. But how many of us actually throw flat-sided crankbaits? 1, 2 out of this whole room. Not very many. So this time of year we got 2 colors. Like I said, dirtier water is going to be something you got to deal with in the colder time of year. So what I've got is the Crush Flat 75X. So right now, especially when the wind's blowing on those shell bed areas, this is going to be a bait that I lean on a lot. I got a shad pattern, and I got a really, really loud, obnoxious colored crawl pattern called Tiger Truce. Anybody ever heard of that color? If you watch my channel, I know you've heard of that color. But so I've got Tiger Truce, and I've got just a sectified shad, sexy shad type color that we're going to be throwing a bunch.
Love that Tiger Truce color right there, man. That is.
It's bad, Dave.
That's the
It
juice.
gets it.
That's
It
the
gets
juice
it.
for this lake.
Now this is going to be
in your pocket.
Yeah,
a little bit of a
some of those flats are going to disappear.
little bit of a Pac-Man special right here. Pac-Man on these shell beds, one thing that he liked to throw, maybe a little bit later, maybe not so much right now, but you definitely could throw it right now. But really, as we get closer to March and get into March, this is going to be needs to be one of your mainstays. That's going to be a square bill. Thank you, sir. Now I've got a shad pattern, of course, and then I've got a bluegill pattern. And this bluegill pattern, I want y'all to see this because the pre-spawn deal to spawn deal, I'm gonna probably throw these are big crankbaits. This is a 3.8. That means, you know, traditionally we got like a 100 series or a 1.5 and then a 200 series or a 2.5. Well, it's a 3.8. This is a really big square bill, but this bait, I fished it a bunch. It deflects off cover. It's called the mini mag is what it's called, because they make one that's like giant, but this is the next one down from that. It's called the mini mag. And this bait deflects really, really good off cover, and it gets big bites. When the Bassmasters were here in fall, who saw Rick Clun catch that 30-pound bag on the first day? He caught it on a 3.8 size crankbait. Now, it was his Lucky Craft version, but it's a similar, very similar crankbait.
Something
So-
Mark would throw a little bigger profile.
Absolutely, Mark Pack would be all over this. That would be his square bill right there.
100%.
So that's why I want to show that. And the bluegill color I want to show you because this paint job, this color is spot on for Lake Fork brim. And what's going to happen is we get into late March and start getting into April, some bluegill are going to start spawning. And you can take the wind theories that you learn on shell beds and literally just take them down banks. I mean, just put your trolling motor on go and get a bluegill square bill tied on a windy bank and go to work on it. And what's going to happen is those bluegill are spawning. Every time you get around a bluegill bed, you'll catch some fish. And I mean, guys, you'll catch some big fish on that bluegill square bill when those bluegill start spawning and you fish the windy area. So we'll pass these around.
Yeah, these would be excellent. Even there is a shallow shell bit bite that we didn't talk about tonight. It's a shad spawn.
Yeah.
And that's where they spawn in the small
Yep.
clams. I didn't mention that.
Yep. And
One of the hottest places for the shad spawn is
Yep.
in those shallow.
Then I got this joker. Find a good color to show. I got this joker right here. So we talked about the impact shad on the Carolina rig, which is really, really good. But a bait that a lot of us have thrown in the pre-spawn since
Oh, yeah.
I was that size and that size, those young men, is a lizard. Anybody remember throwing a lizard in cold time of year when you're a kid? There's a new bait that 6 Sense just released called a hog walla. And essentially it is a cross between a lizard and a brush hog. And when you're throwing a Carolina rig on these shell beds, this time of year, before they really start wanting to bite, you know, they're not really biting the swim bait or the square bill quite yet. A little bit too cold, the water's a little bit too cold. And yeah, so this is the hog walla, and I'll take one out and you guys can check this out. But it's this time of year, before, you know, a lot of times you can go throw a jig even on these shallow shell beds, like a 3/4 ounce heavy jig, and catch them on that. But before that, and some days when they won't bite the other stuff, Carolina rig and old lizard around is what we used to. But now I'm gonna use this, and or a brush hog, and it can get, just toss them in there, bro. And it can get real stupid real quick, right, Mike?
Yes, sir.
In fact, you're the one that taught me this 2 or 3 years ago.
I love it.
You started throwing that Carolina rig brush hog and lizard, and you were
Throw
getting
the
them.
green, just a regular green pumpkin and the watermelon seed, just like that.
This is watermelon with a little bit of red flake in it, but
Sunshine in the red. But
it's got a twin tail. If y'all check it out, so it's like a lizard, but yet it's got the twin tail like a brush hog does. That's why I said it's kind of a cross. So.
when I was young, I learned real fast. There's nothing better for a pre-spawner than a lizard. They think it's just like a water dog, right? Remember water dog? So it's ideal right there. I
Yeah,
like it.
pass that sucker around. So
That thing's a supercharged brush hog.
Yeah, supercharged. I like
it
that.
is. It is. It's really, really good. And it's another bite getter. So 6 Sense came out with several new baits.
Do they make that in multiple sizes?
That's the only size right now. That's brand new bait. It just came out in the last month. They came out with several new baits over the last month or so. And the best part about it was, I got like, when they come out with new stuff, being on their team, being on their pro staff, when they come out with new stuff, they send me like one of everything. Like one package of those hog wallas and one package of those whale swim baits. And what was the other new thing they came out with here recently? Yep, the flush. Yep. So they send me like one package of each so I can try it out, and then I can order whatever colors I want after that from them, right? And so they send me these packages, and I get these 3 packages in, and I go out, and within the first 2 days of fishing, I'm trying them while customers are fishing whatever I think we ought to be catching them on, and I'm catching more fish than my customers on the new baits. And I've caught fish on all 3 of the new baits in the first couple of days, and it just goes to speak to 6 Sense, and I know the lengths they go into when they're testing product, and you know they've really done a good job on a lot of the stuff they've released, and these are no exception. And those 2 particular ones right there, the hog walla and that swim bait, that whale swim bait, will be a big player in my boat on this pattern, the shallow shell bed pattern that we're talking about.
It's something on fork you could use all year long.
Oh, absolutely.
Literally, it's something that could be tied
It could
on.
always go on a Carolina rig in any depth and get bit. And when the fish start spawning, you could go to just flipping a light Texas rig around
Exactly.
and catch them. And
And
yeah.
that swim bait's going to be
It
good
wouldn't-
all the way through the shad spawn and
Yeah.
even after.
yeah, you know, and I wouldn't really want to bed fish with the hog walla because I like short baits for.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What's the preferred hook size that you would be using on that?
You know, it's going to depend on what hook brand, but generally a 4/0 or a 3/0. But on a Carolina rig, I got to tell you something Pac-Man taught me, because he did teach me this. Because I'm always like, I'm a power fisherman, and Mark Pack is too. He throws 2-ounce jig heads on swim baits, for crying out loud. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's a power fisherman. But on a Carolina rig, you want to throw a light wire hook, and so I'll actually throw a 2/0 thin wire offset straight shank hook on a Carolina rig that is, I believe it's a Gamakatsu. I can't remember the name brand, but it's just a really thin wire hook that I'll throw on Carolina rig specifically. Now, if I'm Texas rigging that bait, I'm going to throw it on probably a 4/0 EWG hook, something with a big stout heavy gauge to it. But on a Carolina rig, you want that light wire. And the reason you want that light wire is, the lighter that wire is behind that rig, it's going to have more action.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just going to kind of float a little bit and then go down. So,
Or live fly.
yep.
Yes, sir.
Yepers. So that's it. I just want to show you guys a few baits that can work on this pattern that we're talking about, because I literally got this shipment in about 15 minutes before I headed up here today. So I want to show you all that. Do we have any other questions or comments? Anybody got anything they want to share? Mark Pack story, anything like that?
Right here.
Yes, sir.
What would the bait right now that you prefer this day?
Today?
Yes, sir.
Where'd that jig go? You
Yeah.
got Roy. It's in Roy's pocket.
No.
I was on the water with him yesterday. We threw this.
I would take a jig just like that, young man, and I would put a little crawl bait on the back of it. I like a bait called a stroker crawl bait. Just get you a little crawl bait. And the key tip for me on that jig this time of year, let's see it real quick. I'll take that skirt, and right at the bend of the hook, I'll trim that skirt. See the bottom of the bend of that hook? I'll trim that skirt real short so the jig's nice and short and compact. And then I'll trim the crawl bait where it's as short as it can be without affecting the appendages. And I'll have a nice little compact jig, and that's how I throw it in the wintertime. And for me, my best bite right now, I'm starting to catch a few on the deal we talked about tonight. That's starting to happen, but we're at 49 degrees, 50 degrees. It's going to get better as we get to, when we get to 55, that deal's going to be going down.
Here's how it goes. You ready? Mark Pack, when I first got here, I was struggling, man. My first couple years, this time of year, I didn't know what to do. All these fish are winterized so bad, Mark. What do I do? And he'd say, just remember, son, when that lake hits 54, you ain't catching them, you missing it.
That's right.
All we're waiting for is that climb back. Then when I say that, the main body. So I will work a little bit of everything. I'll work some backwater, the warm trends right now. I love the creek swings. Billy helped me really open up the creek swings. But the minute that main lake, when I launch when I have breakfast and my client says in mid-February, what are we doing today, Mike? I say, well, I don't know. The wind's blowing out here. We're gonna go fish these creek swings. And I idle out of here and I see 55, 54. I'm going to say, abandon that ship. We run in shell beds, son.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make my shell bed hunt just like the loons. I'm going to hunt them out.
But yeah, that's what I'm doing. My best bite is the 1/2 ounce jig in creek bends in about, with the bottom of the creek bend bottoming out in about 8 to 12 feet right now. And the only reason that I'm picking, it doesn't make sense to me really to be fishing the 8 to 12 feet.
Me either.
I would feel like I'd be fishing more 15 to 20 right now. But the deal is when I drive around the lake and when I drive into the mouths of these creeks, when I'm going into a creek bend area where I've got several creek bends at different depths, and when I'm easing in there and I'm in deeper water outside of there in the mouth, all the life is 12 foot and higher. So I'm not fishing a creek bend that's any deeper than 12 foot at the bottom because I need life to be down in that creek for that jig bite to be effective. So I'm not fishing anything deeper than 12 foot. Now,
I don't know why
I may drive out there tomorrow and there's life in 15 to 20 and then I go fish other creek bends. But here lately, and this week especially, it's been 8 to 12.
That's a great lesson in itself, and I know you talked about it
Yeah,
before. What levels of bait? You know, they've been there since November. Mark was catching them in those creek swings already in November in that right range, 8 to 10, 8 to 12.
That's something else he taught me. We could go all night about lessons from Mark Pack. Something else he taught me was I typically waited till about Christmas time to start looking for, you know, I'm thinking pre-spawn, channel bends. They stage in the channel bends for pre-spawn. So I typically waited till about Christmas time till I really started thinking and focusing on throwing a jig in a creek bend. And a few years back, Mark taught me, he's like, no, November's pretty good too. And in fact, you know, like that old first state record that came out of here, it was caught in a creek junction in a jig in November. So you might want to check that out, young man. I was like,
I'm a northerner, but so if I'm wrong, it is what it is. But
oh, you're from the north. You're definitely wrong.
right.
For the record.
We put our frost footings in at 4.5 foot. You know, because that's where everything stabilizes. Everything below that 52 degrees.
Okay.
Is that the same down here on the water?
You put what now? What'd you say?
So frost footings on buildings and houses and everything.
Yeah.
4.5 foot's where the frost line runs at.
Okay.
Our pond waters, everything up there after 4.5 foot deep is 52 degrees.
Oh, I don't know.
We don't have.
Are you asking me about numbers and science and
I'm
stuff?
asking if your water levels down here, once you get down past 5 foot in the water, does
He
it
would be a lot more
stabilize?
likely to be able to answer that.
I'm
than I
thinking no, because too much winds and things like that can churn this
Stir it
up.
up. Yeah.
And so I've never talked to any biologist on fork. This is up my ass what I am, the kind of fish like West Coast. I can tell you every lake. I can tell you the 3 water columns, etc. Generally, you're going to have 2 water columns in a lake. An upper water column, well, 3. Surface layer, which is called subsurface. Okay, when you hear me, like if you watch my McFarland corner report, and I say today's water temperature was 54 degrees, I mean the subsurface. That's the first 12 to 18 inches. Then you're going to have a water column. Because we only have 30, 35 foot, sometimes that can be all one water column like you're suggesting right now. In the summertime, it won't be. We get a thermocline that builds.
It changes.
Changes, hotter water above, cooler water below. In the wintertime here, I suspect with everything the way that it goes out to the tree line and suspends, I'm going to say that water, the summer water below is warmer than above. The deeper water is warmer than above. But I don't see a thermocline, so they don't use it.
No, it's not a thermocline.
No winter thermocline. No
Yeah.
winter thermocline. We don't have depth.
Well, and there was a guy that I saw that did a study where he actually took a thermometer out on like a cable and dropped it to all different depths of the lake out here. And the general consensus after that was there ain't near as big of a swing as you're thinking.
No.
Like in the summertime, you see 90-degree surface temps, you're thinking, okay, it'll be like 70 degree at 50 feet. No, it's like 83.
It's not that
It's
much.
like not
Oh,
a
really?
huge difference between top to
Because
bottom.
we are such a shallow-borne reservoir.
And we're so turbid, like the water's
Constant.
churning. Now,
Constantly.
now in the summertime, the thermocline appears on your graph because that is a lack of dissolved oxygen in the water. It's a totally different water content. Totally different
and we've
water
also
content.
stopped having that movement. I mean, we still get occasional, but you recognize as we get into May, June, July, we start stabilizing the weather. And we still have a day, here and there where you get a big blow. Right now, I mean, every 3 days you don't know what the heck's coming, and it goes from the north for 2 days,
Yeah.
and it goes from the south, and we're so
One day.
Yesterday.
We're so shallow.
We had
Hey,
all
I've
of it
seen it all in
yesterday.
one day.
We saw it all yesterday. It was like nice and calm, a little bit of southwest wind in the morning, a little bit of
And then
south wind.
today.
And then mid-morning it was like, okay, it's turning more out of the west, but it's starting to blow a little bit. And then all of a sudden it went like northeast, and it was blowing like 20, 25 sustained. And then by the time we got off the water, it was northwest, and it was like 15. It was just, yeah, when the water's
bad
doing
to
that,
work
it's
a
going to...
jig.
Hey, listen, I'm going to tell you guys, and this will be funny because I'm from the West Coast, but welcome to Texas because I fished the doggone lake and had north, south, east, and west wind all in one day.
Yep.
Yeah, we had
Craziest
everything. We
place.
had everything.
I say they made the movie Wizard of Oz in the wrong state because Kansas ain't got nothing on how crazy our weather is. See, I've seen a 40-degree swing in 25 minutes in February. We're comfortable with 64 degrees.
Bro,
fall.
we fished a guys tournament,
tournament.
where it went from 65
Yep.
to 30.
Yep.
And I'm
29.
talking,
Oh, yeah,
and it
that's
went
like
it went from
that.
65 to 30 degrees.
5 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, like.
The old saying for East Texas, if you don't like the weather,
Just wait.
Just wait.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I say, Mark
sir.
taught me that one,
Heartbeat.
and I say the opposite sometimes to my clients. They'll say, "Oh, this is so much fun," and I go, "It's Texas, well, it's bigger. You don't. If you're having so much fun, just wait 5 minutes. You got to
might
roll
go
the coaster. Roll the coaster on Fork. Don't let Fork get the best of you.
That's right.
That's it.
Iowa.
Say in Colorado, the only thing the weather guy ever got right was the wind.
You
I
know,
don't get that right
I
here.
mean, I should appreciate the crowd keeping you this long and everything.
So I got to play something.
Is there any other questions before we go? Anybody else got any questions?
All that.
No.
Duluth area.
Yep. Go ahead.
I think you and Mike did a great job.
Hey, thank you.
Oh,
Thanks, sir.
I appreciate
you
that.
being here.
Hardly ever been accused of that. No, I'm just kidding. I do appreciate that, and I do. I appreciate all y'all. And we're sitting here joking about not liking weather or not liking this, but I do know this: we are very, very fortunate to be able to do what we do and live where we live. And I've been a little bit everywhere in the country, and I know Mike has too. And man, there's nowhere else I'd rather be than right here in Northeast Texas. And
That's the truth.
I love going to Sam Rayburn. I do. I truly do love going to Sam Rayburn. And it's home for me. That's what kind of I grew up down in that part of the state. And there's just not a place better than this. There's really not a place better to be than this right here. Fishing aside, weather aside, just the values of the culture out here and the way that we do life out here and the brotherhood that we all share with each other around here, it's the best, man. It really is the best. And you guys are all a fine example of it. And I appreciate every one of y'all coming so very much. I really do. So
Even you.
that's right. Especially you,
Especially
buddy.
you.
Especially you. So thank y'all very much. We thank Lake Fork Marina, and we will be right back here in 2 weeks, 6 p.m. on a Friday. We'll see y'all. Thank y'all.